Thank you, David, and thanks to the Institute for the opportunity to be here. The American Council of Trustees and Alumni and the Institute have some very significant common ground in that we both believe that the liberal arts are not an ornament for the elite, but rather the lifeblood of human progress. And I'm just delighted to have this opportunity to get to know the Institute's work better, to meet all of you and people outside the room, and to share that common task. I hadn't anticipated anything quite so remarkable as this technological wonder. I just brought a flash drive along in case. Well, what I'm going to talk about today will be a little soupçon of Leopold von Ranke on the study of history, but probably a lot closer to Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when the Knight of the Holy Grail says to Indiana Jones, "Choose wisely." And what I want to share particularly with the Institute's group is the necessity of looking under the hood, seeing what's happening in higher education, so that all these extraordinary efforts that are being made to produce people who are college ready and ready for citizenship are not squandered in a poor choice of a secondary institution. This is really beautiful, but there's a lot more to be seen.
The question is whether it will work. Huh.
Okay. Can we get one of our tech specialists here?
There was a gentleman here.
Okay. There has to be some kind of central control here. I'm sorry?
Oh, what about this?
Oh. There we are. Thank you. It's a mouse.
It's catching up.
Okay. This is the quote that Stanley Kurtz more properly gave in English, but I do like to put Cicero in the original. Moreover, not to know what happened before you were born, that is always to be a child. And I'm afraid that is writ large at so many colleges and universities. And here I'm going to channel for a moment. I took this actually from Neil Ferguson's wonderful speech that he gave at ACTA's annual conference on the decline and fall of history. He's drawn so much from Collingwood. The present is the actual, the past is the necessary, the future is the possible. An attempt to understand the present by reconstructing its determining conditions. That's what the study of history is about. And it's this that has led Ferguson to call for the study of applied history. Again, this is not an ornament for the elite. It's not a parlor game. It's something essential for the way we move forward as a nation, as a civilization. And here I pay homage to one of the most wonderful people I've ever worked for, the late Bruce Cole, the creator of the We the People initiative. Unlike a monarchy, a democracy is not automatically self-perpetuating. History and values have to be renewed from generation to generation. Again, not an idle pursuit, and certainly not one that institutions of higher education, if they have a smattering of institutional ethics, will ignore. John Kennedy, this was published posthumously, gave a wonderful, wonderful insight into this. There is little that is more important for an American citizen to know than the history and traditions of his country. Without such knowledge, he stands uncertain and defenseless before the world, knowing neither where he has come from nor where he is going. With such knowledge, he is no longer alone, but draws a strength far greater than his own from the cumulative experience of the past and a cumulative vision of the future. Are we there anymore is, of course, the key question. And more important, how do we get back to that? Well, here I'm borrowing something from the National Association of Scholars. Peter, were you on board when Steve Balch published this?
Yeah.
Dissolution of General Education. In 1914, 88% of U.S. colleges and universities required students to take specific history courses. Between 1964 and 1993, the percentage of institutions possessing such courses dropped from 38% to 12%. And as I'll show you, that trend has simply gotten worse. One of the things that I've always tried to do in academic administration is to ask the question of presidents, provosts, faculty, what gives you confidence when you see a student walk across the stage and pick up a diploma that that person is in fact college educated, someone that you are proud to see as a graduate of your institution? I'm sad to say that almost every place where I have asked that question, I've gotten rather blank looks. And until that question is answered, no institution has done its job. So where are we now? The American Council of Trustees and Alumni regularly surveys the extent or lack thereof of knowledge of history and civics among college graduates. And here you can see some of the grim results. Being nearsighted, I will take the opportunity to read those for others who share my affliction. In 2000, we published a survey called Losing America's Memory. This had such an impact that it sparked a unanimous joint resolution of Congress that we had to do better. I'm sad to say that we haven't done better, but here's what we found. Only 23% of the graduates of the top 50 institutions, we went here for the elite, identified James Madison as the father of the U.S. Constitution. Only 26% knew that the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in areas of the Confederate States not held by the Union. And only one third could identify George Washington as the American general at Yorktown. Now, some of you may be saying, this just sounds like College Bowl, but read on. We commissioned a survey last year with NORC. We try to get organizations that have extremely high credibility as survey organizations, National Opinion Research Center. College graduate subpopulation. 39% of the respondents believe that the executive branch has the power to declare war. 15% identified Brett Kavanaugh as the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, and 16% selected the late Antonin Scalia, who'd been gone from us for approximately 4 years. Now, again, maybe that sounds like College Bowl, but go to the last question there, the last finding. 51% of college graduates could not correctly identify the term lengths of senators and representatives. Let me hasten to say, this is not one of these old-time flunkaroos where the respondent actually had to provide the answer. This was a multiple-choice survey. So those college graduates who bother to vote, and that's another attendant problem, if they bother to vote, when they go into the voting booth, do they actually understand how long they're sending someone to Washington? So here are the two challenges. Is there any study of U.S. history and government at all? And each year, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni does a survey called What Will They Learn? We're now in its 12th iteration, I think. I have the battle scars to prove it. And what we found is that only 18% of the 1,127 colleges and universities require even a single foundational course in American history or government. This is really quite a disgrace. We hear every conceivable excuse for it. Well, they already know it when they get here. Nonsense. Our surveys show that's not true. Or they'll pick it up in their courses. Again, not true. And a more difficult question, I think, Peter, you'll be getting into this. If so, how well are they learning it? And here I have just a little polemic about Howard Zinn from Michael Kazin. And I deliberately chose a historian, a social scientist of the left. You can read more in Sam Weinberg and Stanford's site. So how well is this being studied? That's where I'm going to channel, maybe in Q&A, a little bit of Leopold von Ranke. Oh, wow, this is going to be a little hard to read. I have to talk to my artistic friend who changed my PowerPoint to look pretty. This is Neil Ferguson's wonderful speech that he gave at ACTA, The Decline and Fall of History. History at United States colleges is experiencing a decline and fall farther and faster than Gibbon's Roman Empire. I'm going to have to put my glasses on now. Apologies for that. And where's decline and fall? Very sensitive device here. And here, beneath that, I'm quoting Benjamin Schmidt from the AHA. Of all the major disciplines, history has seen the steepest declines in the number of bachelor's degrees awarded. In 2008, the National Center for Education Statistics reported 34,642 majors in history. In 2017, the most recent year for which data are available, the number was 24,266. Between 2016 and 2017, the number of history majors fell by over 1,500. Even as university enrollments have grown, history has seen its raw numbers erode so heavily. And there you can see the chart. At the very bottom, change in degrees is history. And the question becomes, how many of these wounds are attributable to the villain who's usually charged, which is STEM, or the other villain, professionalism, and how many are self-inflicted wounds, a major that has so little intellectual heft that students will gravitate to others. Well, I don't want this to turn into a negative, higher education is awful, we need to walk away from it. We can't. That's a ridiculous way to approach it. Some schools are doing it well. Christopher Newport University, President Paul Tribble put this in the Richmond Times-Dispatch. This year, after lengthy discussions and review among our faculty, we decided to require that every CNU student take at least one course in American history or government and a basic course in economics, which we deem to be a central preparation for citizenship and career. Wow. What this shows is that faculty and leadership can actually turn things around. And it once was this way. If you look at the Harvard Red Book from 1945, education for an informed life in our society has chiefly to do with the question of common standards and common purposes. Now that changed quite a lot in the 70s. The faculty committee that designed general education, thinking once that it would combat academic specialization and provide students with cultural foundations for life in America, fell apart. While liberal arts has continued to embody American values, these values no longer seem as noble as they did after the defeat of Hitler. In the 60s, the Vietnam War came to dominate the American political scene, and the education Harvard designed for a community of free men looked suspicious to people who doubted the reality of freedom in America, and it continues. Students no longer look for ways to put new life into liberal arts education. They attacked it as a tool of an oppressive social order. Instead of demanding more general education, students tended to demand courses more relevant to particular contemporary problems. And what does this look like? ACTA published a report a few years ago called No U.S. History, in which we looked at the major requirements of, again, the U.S. News and World Report, top schools. And we found that of the top 25 liberal arts colleges, only 7 required U.S. history. Top 25 national universities, 4 required U.S. history. Top 25 public universities, 14. And some of these, we were just being charitable to list them as fulfillments of the requirement. They included courses like History of the FBI, or a very popular one called History of Sexualities. It's generally been my impression that college students are able to figure out things in that realm more easily than they are to understand the founding principles. And we find American history requirements fulfilled with things like and this is, by the way, fulfillment for the major. Mad Men and Mad Women at Middlebury, Hip-Hop Politics and Youth Culture in America, University of Connecticut, Eating, Growing, Catching, Knowing, Historical Perspectives on Food, Science, and Environment at Princeton, From Motown to Hip-Hop, University of Virginia, History by Hollywood in Florida, and Food in Modern America at Purdue. I'm not saying for a moment that these are things that are devoid of intellectual content, but do these highly niche courses actually give students that basic understanding that prepares them to understand where we are now and where we've come from? And in terms of fulfilling general education requirements, we see even stranger fish. Atomic lizards, robots, pocket monsters, and cute kitties. Japanese culture goes global. Vampires, history of the undead. Vampires are really fascinating, speaking as a classicist, but I'm not sure this really does it for a general ed course. Horror films in American culture, music in American culture, America through baseball, hip-hop politics and youth culture, the history of surfing, pets in society. Again, much there that is interesting, but how much of this is really sustaining? I hesitate always to get the government to solve problems for higher education. Higher education needs to take stock of its own mission and its own values. But I have been rather heartened to see that we have seen some legislative action that sets guidelines and parameters. Florida very recently in statute requires the schools in the state university system and in other public colleges to develop a new course in civic literacy or revise an existing general education core course in American history, and they drill down further. These courses must include basic principles of American democracy, how that's applied in Republican form of government, understanding of the United States Constitution, understanding of founding documents, landmark Supreme Court cases. Never do I want to see the state or the federal government interfere in what goes on in a classroom. But to be able to set general guidance, the how and the what will be read remains the prerogative of the faculty. But to say that this is part of what somebody who is at a state-funded institution should study, better if it comes from the Board of Trustees, but legislative guidance, as has happened in some states, is actually a reasonable way forward. South Carolina has, as we speak, the REACH Act, which once again will look towards essentials of the United States Constitution, Declaration of Independence, Emancipation Proclamation, and so forth. Can the devil quote scripture for his own benefit? Of course. That's the risk that we run in a free society. That's one of the risks that we willingly take in preservation of academic freedom, which is essential for progress. But to have some kind of big picture guidance is something that is absolutely crucial. So how do we move forward? There's another ACTA report, Crisis in Civic Education. This we wrote some 17 years after losing America's memory, lamenting the fact that there was once a resolution that we were going to do things better in K-12 and in higher education, and it hasn't happened. All kinds of noble intent, multi-million-dollar studies, but ACTA has a basic solution. We need clear requirements for knowledge of American institutions, not vague statements of purpose. Good intentions are not a substitute for a curriculum. Make it a required course, simply require it. And to parents who are pouring their energy into preparing students for career and citizenship, I say what was in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade: choose wisely. There are schools out there that have come together as institutions of learning to set those standards for what must be part of everybody's education. And I commend to you What Will They Learn, the survey that we do every year. You can find it online. We'll send you a print copy if you want one. Look at the differences in what kind of intellectual community schools set for everybody. Thank Thanks for the opportunity to be with you.